Welcome to No Cape Required, where we celebrate the courage it takes really to show up as your true self. Cape off, mask down, really helping women live and lead authentically. And if you're loving these conversations and you've been joining in and you want more real talk, hit that follow button so that you never really miss an episode and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. So what are we talking about today? Today we are shining a light on a group I think that doesn't always get the spotlight, and that's introverts. Did you know that introverts make up anywhere, it's estimated between 30 and 50% of the population? That's right, nearly half of us. I'm not one, but nearly half of the population are quieter and maybe more reflective. And yet, our culture, I think, it often praises maybe that loudest voice in the room. And introverts can feel that pressure to adapt, to perform, to be more outgoing, just to fit in. My guest today, Stacey Chazen, knows this struggle well. For years, she wrestled with societal narrative that equates success with extroversion. But instead of forcing herself to be someone she wasn't and putting that cape on and trying to wear it proudly, Stacey chose a different path. She embraced her introverted nature, and in doing so, unlocked strengths that really propelled her forward, both, I think, personally and professionally. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you've ever felt out of step with world's expectations, this conversation will remind you that your quieter power is not just valid, but it's vital. So let me tell you about Stacey. She's the founder of the I Factor. We'll have to figure out what that is. And she's a dynamic leadership development coach and a proud introvert who's rewriting this narrative on introversion, which is great because I want to talk about some of the fallacies in a moment that we have around people who are introverts. Now, as a fervent advocate for introverts, Stacey draws on her her extensive corporate and nonprofit experience as well. Using her education to empower introverts, guide them towards self-acceptance and fulfillment and success in the workplace and beyond, I think. So welcome to No Cape Required, Stacey. We are so glad you're here.
Thank you, Dara. I'm so happy to be here as well. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, it's something we haven't talked about on the podcast yet. So when you and I had our exploratory call, I was like, this is exciting. And particularly when I started to dig in and look at some of the research to see what percentage of introverts there are. So anywhere from 30 to 50% are introverts. And I'm like, really? I don't think I've met a lot of introverts. But you know what? I didn't know they were introverts because introverts can I'm going to say turn it on. We'll talk about that, but can turn it
Yep.
on or dial it up a bit when they need to. So let's talk about some fallacies around
Yep.
introverts. And you help me out here, but um, I've heard that introversion is a weakness or a liability, especially in a professional setting or social setting. And here's a few more. They're just shy and antisocial, or they lack leadership qualities. They're
hmm
just not good communicators, right?
hmm
Or they really need to fix themselves to succeed. You just need to
hmm
get over that and fix yourself, right? Or they just don't like people. So, are any of those true?
None of those are true.
I was afraid of that.
Yeah, yeah, none of those are true. And the first one you started off with, that they're just not cut out to be leaders. That one is kind of fueled by all the others.
Mhm.
So, and I'll respond to what you said just before that, how 30 to 50% of the world is introverted, but and how that surprised you. And what you said is exactly right. We can turn it on, and there's this pressure to act like an extrovert and counter all the myths you just talked about when you're thinking about a professional environment. So we feel like we have to pretend to be extroverted because that's what's rewarded, right?
Wow. So what does that do to you, your psyche, physically, mentally, emotionally, if you got to walk into a group of people and talk and converse and have conversations and give information, teach, whatever the case may be? How does that affect you when you've got to turn it on? We'll use that term.
It affects you. Well, first of all, when you're told that you need to act like someone you're not, when you have
Mhm.
to, be fake or pretend to enjoy things that you don't in order to be seen in a positive light, to be seen as a leader, it really hurts your self-esteem
Yeah.
because you begin to internalize this notion that you're somehow not enough and that being introverted is not good enough or not as good as being an extrovert, particularly when you're thinking about leadership and you're thinking about professional environments. So first and foremost, you internalize it and you don't feel good about yourself.
Mm.
And then secondly, anytime we try to pretend to be something or someone we're not, we might have some short-term success in one conversation or doing one type of task at work, but over time, we're not going to be successful when we're doing it from a place of inauthenticity and denying the strengths we actually have to do something well and trying to do it in a way that we feel like the extroverts do it, so we feel like we need to act like they do.
Yeah. That's what this whole podcast, the idea behind this podcast is that women don't need to wear the Superwoman cape and pretend to be
Yeah.
something they're not. And when they can free themselves up and embrace who they are and let the authentic come through, in leadership and in life, they're much happier and content. So, how can introverted women sort of reframe their visibility and influence where they need to influence, in leadership? When they've told they have to do this? How do they reframe that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, all of it comes down to doing that, and the other strategies we can talk about today are all rooted in identifying what your core strengths are, what innately makes you great, what makes you tick, natural strengths and gifts that you're born with. And this is a concept that I use in my coaching practice. The I factor, and that refers to, of course, you're the intro. All of you as an introvert. What makes you great as an introvert? That's your I factor, right? And so, if you, as a woman, think about what's the best of me? What are my core strengths? What are my gifts? And the way that I guide my clients to do that is a process that's part of a framework called appreciative coaching. And appreciative coaching is essentially figuring out how to identify the best of who you are and build on those strengths so that you're building a future for yourself that's entirely rooted in the positive, not trying to fix what's wrong with you or fix what either you or someone else has told you is lacking, but really identifying and amplifying your strengths. And as an introvert, as a female introvert, what this looks like, and it's for anyone, but it's particularly important for women who are introverted, is to reflect on times in your life, particularly at work, when you felt great, when you felt like you were making big contributions, that you were allowed to use your strengths, that you were able to show up authentically and have the impact that you're seeking. And when you start to look across the times in your mind that come up for you, these are known as peak experiences, you'll begin to see traits, behaviors, actions that show up across these experiences. So it could be that you're seeing, oh, every time I felt this way, I was writing, or I was mediating some conflict, or I was serving as a mentor to someone. And you begin to see the types of traits and behaviors and gifts that are showing up across these experiences make up your what's known as your positive core. And that's the best of who you are. So once you have that in mind, once you know what your positive core is, you can begin to find opportunities to use it at work and really in all places in your life.
Okay, I love that because I think we all need to take that self-assessment, right? To see what our core strengths are, what we're really good at, and what brings us energy too, right?
Yeah.
I can tell when I'm doing something that I really don't enjoy doing, but I notice my energy level will drop. But when I'm game on, right, and doing the things that I'm really good at, and
Yeah.
my energy level just rises. So this seems like it would be even more important for introverts who already have, let's just say, like an X on them, right? Like, oh, they're introverted, they can't lead, or they're introverted, they're not going to be good at XYZ. Not the case, right? We're putting labels on there when they have so many, as each of us do, have so many talents to be shared. That being introvert is not something that's going to stop them from leading or other achievements.
That's exactly right. And the other piece you just touched upon when you talked about what gives you energy, right? When you feel energized. And that's really and this is a myth. One of the myths you shared earlier was that introverts are just shy, right? And they don't like to be around people. But really the definition of an introvert versus an extrovert pertains to energy. So someone who is introverted is energized by time spent alone, having opportunities to think deeply, to work deeply, whereas someone who is extroverted is energized by engaging with others, particularly in a group format. And then the reverse is true. The things that energize an extrovert sucks the energy out of an introvert. Things that time spent alone that we introverts love, if an extrovert does that for too long, they're going to feel depleted because they haven't gotten that energy from the outside world.
You are so right on that. Yeah, if I'm by myself too long, I have too much think time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I feel yeah, I've got to get connected with someone. Um, I've also heard, and I have friends and colleagues who are introverts who say that they're really good one-on-one, right? They like to have those deep conversations. One-on-one or very, very small group where it's not
Mhm.
overwhelming and they can share and really think deeply and share those deep ideas they have, which
Mhm.
what a great skill for a leader, right? Being able to think deeply. Most leaders don't have enough time to sit and, really put the time needed in to think deeply about projects and strategic thinking and that sort of thing, where isn't that's an
Yes.
advantage for someone who's an introvert to be able to
Yep.
do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly.
Well,
Uh,
that's awesome. So what are if we were looking at some ways of noticing that a woman is leading, I guess it could be anybody really, but this is for women, is leading where she's misaligned with her these strengths that we're talking about.
yeah.
How does she begin to realign? So we know if we take this timeline and we look at things that when I do these sorts of things, they bring me energy. I feel really good. I'm successful at it. When I do these things, they don't. And I'm doing a
Yep.
lot of these things right now. So I know I'm not aligned, so to
Yep.
speak. So what does she do?
Well, let's take a look at a few examples.
Okay.
So one thing that this woman was is probably going to realize is that when she has back-to-back meetings all day long, or doesn't have a break in between, even a short break in between meetings, she's likely going to feel depleted. And she's not going to be doing her best work when she's hopping from meeting to meeting. So one thing you can easily do, especially if you're in a position of leadership, is block your schedule. Make
Mm.
sure that either you're not allowing for back-to-back meetings, or maybe you're just building in a 10-minute buffer. So instead of scheduling 60-minute meetings, you schedule 50-minute meetings. So you have that 10 minutes to recharge.
And how do they recharge? Talking about that,
Um,
what
you
different ways?
all kinds of things. So if you just have 5 or 10 minutes, you can meditate. You
Mm.
can listen to music. If you're able to, go for a walk, especially if you're working from home and that's easier, right? Go outside, breathe in the fresh air, walk around the block. Do something that is going to not be engaging with other people, and it's going to allow you to get your thoughts together, have that quiet alone time that you need to get your energy levels back.
Okay. So one thing they can do if they're not aligned with their strengths,
Yep.
and they need to, is to the first and it seems like the easiest, right, is to take charge of our schedule. Do some time blocking, at least block a buffer in there if you can. I know some people just have open schedules and people just plug in things. So maybe you just have to mark something off that where it can't be changed, right? Where you've got some of that time in there. So that's kind of the easiest, right? And then take care
I
of
hope it's
yourself.
easy. I hope so, right? Because
Well, okay,
you have to rely
straightforward.
on others to respect it, right? And you have to enforce the boundary to the extent that you can.
Ah, okay. So that's it. We have to make sure that we can enforce it. If we say
Yeah.
this is my schedule, you have to enforce it when people say, let me just I really need to talk to you. Let me book over. And yeah, we
Yeah,
have to
and I'll
stick.
acknowledge, depending on, the hierarchy, where you fall in the hierarchy in your organization, you're going to have different degrees of autonomy to be able to do that. And if you're dealing with your boss who wants to get on your calendar, you can certainly make the request, but you need to kind of make an in the moment situation, call whether that situation warrants you making an exception for sure.
Okay. Well, are there any other ways other than this calendaring, taking care of your
Yep.
schedule to make sure? What else can introvert women do to make sure that they're realigning back to their strengths?
So, as we talked about, introverts are very good when they have an opportunity to engage one-on-one. So, if you think about a typical meeting, you're going to have maybe you have 5 to 10 people in a meeting, and questions could be thrown out to the group, and you're asked to, Dara, what do you think we should do? This problem just popped up. How can we move forward? Now, if you weren't expecting this question and didn't have time to prepare for it, as an introvert, you might be thrown off a little bit. And what's going to be really valuable for you and for your team in terms of getting the best ideas and the best work out of you is if you have time to think about it. If you have time to come back and say, you know what, I'd like to give that some thought. Could I meet with you afterward to give you my thoughts? Or could I give some thought to it and share my ideas with you in an email or in writing? So you can do that if you are not the person leading the meeting, but you're a person around the table. That's one way. Those are some ways you can respond. If you are the person at the head of the table and you're introverted, I would encourage you to not use a group meeting to solicit input from people and hear their thoughts and share your thoughts with them, but to set up smaller groups or one-on-one conversations with your team members to say, here's a challenge we're facing. Let them know in advance that's what you're going to be talking about so they have time to think and prepare. And then when you sit down together, you're able to focus in on them directly without the distraction of other noise from the group. And you're able to share your thoughts, your opinions, ask the questions that are going to get you to the solution in the best possible way in an environment that's best aligned with how you think and how you do your best work.
So just in recapping that, you kind of shared two things. You shared that if you're an introvert in a meeting, get called on or get called out in a big
Yep.
space, you can say, "Let me think about it. Can I get back to you in an email or can we talk afterwards?" Right? But
Yep.
you also flipped it and said, if you're the leader and you're an introvert, we know we have leaders who are introverts, right? How you can honor yourself and your strengths and maybe not have the large meetings when they're not necessary. Maybe meet
Yeah.
smaller groups or one-on-one. And we know those are so valuable, those check-in one-on-ones,
Yep.
right? That can help as well.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. For leaders, the ability to have good relationships, meaningful relationships with your team members is so important that they see you as someone who's listening to them, who sees what their needs are, and for your team members to feel valued. It's going to be very difficult for you as an introvert to do that in a group. So it's not something, those relationships are not what you're going to build at a monthly staff meeting or at a team meeting. But what I recommend is set up individual coffee chats or individual meetings, either in person or over Zoom if you're largely remote, where you have an opportunity one-on-one with your team members to listen to them, to hear what their goals are, what are their challenges, what are their thoughts for your team or for the organization. And you're going to be able to demonstrate your empathy, your high levels of emotional intelligence, and the fact that you care about them as an employee or team member. That's where you're going to really excel at building those relationships when you do it one on one.
And if you can do that, that already serves you to be a great leader, right? We know
Yes.
that the workforce wants an empathetic leader. They want an emotionally intelligent leader, right? They want to build that relationship and have that trust in someone. So that works very well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else that comes to mind?
Um, Introverts tend to be very strong writers. So if you are a leader and let's say your team or your organization is facing some crisis, you might not be as comfortable standing up in front of a group and sharing your vision for how you're going to move forward. So I would encourage you to use the power of the pen or the keyboard, so to speak, right?
Mm.
Share your thoughts in writing. You're probably going to be, though not necessarily, it's going to vary by person. There's a good chance you're going to be more inspirational and strategic and reassuring to your staff, to your team members, when you have a chance to share your vision, your strategic recommendations, and your reassurances in a written format.
That is great advice. Already, so many very practical things that introverts can use as a leader or just in an organization working with leaders who might put them on the spot or other people might put them on the spot, just working with colleagues. Yeah,
Yep.
there. I know that this is your passion and you help introverted women. What is a powerful mindset shift that might help women lead more confidently, or just without that self-doubt or chatter in their head of you know um, that inner critic going on?
Yeah, it's that you're enough, that the way you are
Mm,
innately wired, your innate strengths are the best path for you to be successful. Using your
mm.
innate strengths is hands down far superior to performing well, getting recognition for your work, finding and excelling in a career that is going to fulfill you and help you meet your goals. All of that is far superior than trying to fix what you're not. or improve a skill that you don't have or you don't have strongly.
You know, Stacey, that goes right along with research. Research shows that if you focus on your strengths
Yes.
instead of trying to bring up your deficits, and we
Yep.
can always work a little bit on, what we're not great at. But if you really focus on your strengths, we get much further ahead. There's so much
Yes.
more ROI on that than there is, how do I work on this bottom, these bottom things that are not working for me?
Yeah.
So to me, and what we've talked about, that means instead of worrying about being an introvert and how do I be more outgoing in this group, team meeting, it's what am I bringing to the table that's a strength that will help
Yes.
this team meeting move forward, this team move forward, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And folks can do that using that framework I talked about earlier about reflecting on your peak experiences and identifying your positive core. Another great way to do that is to take a personality assessment like
Mm.
Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram.
Mhm.
And assessments like that, and the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI, is the one that most people have heard of. It's the world's most commonly used personality assessment. And I use that with my coaching clients, and it's a great way to see not just what your introversion or extroversion looks like, but how do you take in information? How do you make decisions? How do you interact with the world in terms of planning or being spontaneous? And when you get your report from an MBTI or from an Enneagram, it tells you really like how are you wired and how can you best show up in your work and your life. And so that's another tool that folks could use to zero in on what are my core strengths.
Another one I'll throw out there is Clifton Strengths, right? It
Yeah,
used to be called StrengthsFinder 2.0 or StrengthsFinder. That's a great one too because it will give you your top strengths, right? So it lays it out for you. You can see and use it. So any type of self-awareness is what I hear you saying
yep.
that you gain, whether you do it yourself, mapping it out over the last 10 years. Where were my strengths? What did I do that brought me joy and that successful at? To taking these assessments and putting it all together so you have a picture of really who you are and knowing that you're already enough. This is that
That's
you're
right.
who you are, yes, which
That's
is something
exactly
that
right.
we
Yep.
talk about on here. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, what do you wish that organizations really understood about introverted women and how they can lead and what they really need to be successful and thrive in organizations?
Yeah, I wish that organizations realize that introverted women have a whole host of strengths that fall outside the typical definition of leadership. And these strengths are untapped. And as a result, the organization is not using, it's missing out on all this fuel it has innately to thrive, to be successful, to hit its goals. So, as an example, we think of leaders as being loud, as being in front of the room, as being someone who's very social and gregarious and someone who thinks out loud with ideas on the spot. None of these things describe typical introverts.
Right.
But introverts, in many of the ways that we just talked about, have all these leadership strengths that can help an organization meet its sales goals, achieve its mission, uh, engage and get new clients. And when you only look at leadership through one lens, that extroverted lens, and we know that's how it works because even though about half of the people in the world are introverted, only 2 to 4% of senior executives identify as introverted. So the extroverts are ruling the boardroom. They're
Hmm.
ruling the organizations. And anytime you have some dominant demographic or personality type in leadership, it's very hard to break that cycle, right? Because we tend to hire and promote and be attracted, gravitate toward people who are like us. So when you have extroverts in positions of leadership, they're more likely to hire and promote other extroverts. And so I wish that organizations could take off that lens, that extrovert bias mindset, and begin to recognize that leadership can look like all kinds of things. And when you think about introversion and the strengths associated with that, they're really missing out when they don't ignite and support those traits.
So really avoid labeling a leader, what a leader has to be. And you're right, all this you talked about, right? Charisma. That's who you think a great
Yeah.
leader has charisma and they, can rally the whole team
Mhm.
there to get things done in the whole organization. And yet we all have great strengths and talents that would help do the same thing, just in different ways. So there's
Yeah,
not one way to lead or one quotation mark there type of leader and how you have to present yourself. Well, this
that's
has been great. What have I not asked you about that you still feel like you need to share, or something that our leaders and listeners would like to hear?
so one thing that I advise organizations and I advise individuals is that when you are first joining a team or the first time a team comes together on a project, let's say, my recommendation is for everyone to go around the table and share with the group what's one thing you want everyone else to know on this team about what you need to be successful.
Mm.
And when you're an introvert, that could include things like I'm going to do my best work when I have the opportunity to have a mix of collaborative and solo work time. Or I'm going to give you my best ideas when I have the opportunity to share them with you in writing, or I get a meeting agenda ahead of time, which is a best practice, regardless of whether you're introverted or extroverted.
Right.
It gives not only the introverts an opportunity to share, but folks who are extroverted, right? What do you want people to know so that others on your team, including your manager, can know what do I need to do to best support this person, to get her to enable her to do her best work and for her to be seen for who she is and not feel the pressure to conform to an extroverted work style and culture.
That strategy is good for the whole team,
Oh
not
yeah.
just for the introverts, right? And you didn't say, go around, let's say, are you an extrovert or introvert? Tell us, raise your hand. It's not that, it's what you need. And not every introvert needs exactly the same thing. So you're able to tell, using your strengths and knowing where your power is, what you need to be successful. And we hear it from everybody else in the room too. Usually we can tell those extroverts pretty easy without them ever, even saying it. But we have neurodivergent folks, right?
Yep.
There's all sorts of people that well, everybody needs something different to be successful. So that practice you just shared there, fantastic way to figure out how we can work better together to succeed. That is
Yeah.
fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. I hope our introverts will share this with their other introvert friends that need to hear it and take some tips away to live and lead authentically and be successful. And I appreciate you being here. I'll make sure that we have your contact information in the show notes. And this was a wonderful interview. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. My pleasure to be here, Dara. Thank you.